Welcome, everyone. This is Tristan McGough, and once again, we're going to take a session in intermediate selfology, and today, we're actually going to look at identity and identification. This should be a lot of fun. So we're asking ourselves now who the I of the self is. And spoiler alert, we're going to go into the various levels of identity today, and we're just going to have an exposure to the way that identity makes its manifestation through identification. Well, you know that selfology, and that's really what we're dealing with here. In intermediate selfology, we're dealing with the science and study of the self. Now, science in terms of an organized body of knowledge relating to a particular subject. And here the subject is self. And the self that we're dealing with, of course, we have arranged in terms of 7 intuitional ideas, which emerge as pristine cognitions in all of our consciousness. Each of our awareness individually is able of apprehending the self, not only in terms of cognos, that is one's own conscious being, but also in terms of aeon, that is the self as a singularity, as we have here demonstrated, and the self as well as it actually is in reality without any disguise or any duplicity or delusion. And then we can see the self as comprehending everything that is part of the systematized universe that we understand, and perhaps the multiverse, which we attempt to understand, and the paraverse, which is the basis of all understanding. And another way that there is a pristine cognition of what the self is, as the subject of study in selfology, is as the psychonaut, the pilgrim. And the pilgrim or the psychonaut is the one who begins to unfold their own conscious being. The more that they unfold their conscious being and become adept at doing that, they have a mastery over Maya, which is the measured material in which we live as finite beings through our empirical self. That is the self that apprehends discrete sections of our sensory world and divides it up into scenes with spans of time and series of events, as well as having a certain structure, if you will, that is carved out of a section that is either heard or seen or both or smelt, etc. And then there is, of course, the parousia, and that is where the universe has come home to itself, and the individual conscious being becomes a conscious agent of contribution to the socioverse, that is, to the universe as it is unfolding from the inside out as conscious being. Now, to selfologize is to utilize one of these or all of these concepts, pristine cognitions of self, and to look at and analyze your very own self in that fashion. Of course, the one that I hadn't mentioned is omnos, which is all of these taken together. It's the entirety. It's the all-accommodating. Whatever you can throw into the bucket of what is reality, whether it is being, non-being, finite being, or conscious being, whatever you can toss in to that reservoir of ultimate reality that includes all things, from finite through transfinite to infinite. That's what the omnos is, and we are all able to look at our own individual selves through any one of these cognitions, and if you will, to cogitate, to think upon it, and to review it. But when we do that, we are actually utilizing the self, are we not only to analyze the self, but to catalyze the self, that is, to build the self up. And more than that, we are creating a genesis, new thoughts, new ideas, new feelings, new willings and intentions, and resolutions and decisions. All of this novelty is part of the genesis. But not only do we create the novelty of our own inner world, not only are we capable of analyzing it and selfologizing about it, not only are we able to thereby build it up through catalysis, that is, through the use of these various concepts, but we synthesize it with everything that we have known before, whether it's what we've felt and sedimentalized, whether it's something that we've experienced and encoded as a physical episode in our lives, whether it's the thoughts, our own credos, our own beliefs, or whether it's the thinkings we have at this very moment. So today we're going to selfologize, and we're going to start off with the idea of the self as the conscious being. And this is the all-mirroring, this is the for itself. Whenever the individual being is conscious of anything that it does, it, of course, has an object, because it's the subject. So I've referred to this in the past as intuition, that is, of consciousness having the fundamental property of being transparent and reflexive. Not only is it the light, the natural light of awareness, it's intuition, but it is the very source of identity, which in omniphilosophy we term ipseatus. Ipseatus, of course, coming from a Latin word referring to self-identity. Here we just utilize identity, and you see that it is the very center. Right? We just said that in terms of when we generate our own interior states, whether it's through the will, and we're willing something, or we're feeling something, or we're thinking about something, or we're doing something, we know we're doing, thinking, feeling, or willing that something. Now, we know that's called apperception. And so that actually is an axis that goes throughout our entire being. In terms of the microcosmic self, this is the axis of identity. In the same way that we could represent in terms of the self as an octahedron, with the higher or spiritual self represented as the upper pyramid, and the more material or empiric self as the lower. The in-between here is the epistic self that we know historically as the soul, as the psyche, as the primary system by which the axis of willing and the axis of living, the axis of feeling, and the axis of thinking reach out, unfold their potentials as intelligence, vivacious, and sentience, being able to be feeling in the world, and conscience, being able to build in the world something lasting through the power of will. But today I want to concentrate on the axis of identity, because it actually does include, as you look at that, right, that's all of those capacities that we've spoke of before as the cognography of human existence, where there are 7 planes all the way from the aeonal, that is the point in which you have at the very top ipsitas, that is identity, that is the I is I, and plus you have the technical terms are for will and feeling, the mental aspect, thinking, and then doing, the activity. Those are all present. They're all interrelated. Identity is the axis that shares those primordial powers that each of us have as a self. Each of us as a self has these powers. We have the identity, the love, the life, the mind, and the will. These faculties that turn out to be, once the potentials become actuals, turn out to be conscience and intelligence and sentience and vivacience. But all of that is what pivots around the axis of identity. This very axis itself is the eye of the hurricane of faculties, fields, powers, applications of the powers. If we reduce those 7 levels into the axis of identity itself, what I'm calling the who, the pure cognos, the essential identity, at the level of the aeon, you have merely I. That is the I as consciousness. And here you'll notice I have a note, because consciousness confers identity as identity certifies consciousness. Consciousness and identity are one and the same. It's the only real form of identity that has any being or meaning in the world, existentially. All the others, mathematical, philological, historical, social, psychological meanings of what identity, they're all either vacuous, otherwise they have a derivative meaning from consciousness, which actually confers identity. It is consciousness that confers identity. Nothing else does. You know that apodictically, that is self-evidently. No one has to tell you who you are. You know who you are. That's the nature of intuition. Now, who you are, you have 7 different levels of interpreting who you are, beginning first of all with that fundamental aeonic realization that I am consciousness. The second, at the level of the intuito, or in theosophical terms, the atmic. This here is the cognal I am universal, unlimited consciousness. Here you have the emergence and emergence of who I am, right? Who is cognos? Now, I am what? Being. Conscious being. This is what we're speaking of. When we're speaking about conscious being, we're talking about consciousness and its ability as identity to identify with various fields or planes of reality, interact, and thereby actualize what it potentially is in terms of will, love, mind, and life. We'll deal at another time with the purpose behind that and the why. But today, let's just talk about what this actually represents in terms of a scale or spine, if you will, of identity that runs clear up from your center as a spiritual entity all the way down to where you experience your body as an it amongst other its in the world, finite physical things. And above that, the I, us. That is where we see ourselves in our imagination as a social entity, whether it's a social entity interacting with other sentients in nature, or whether it's a social entity that acts organically at a community and family level, or whether it is that sense of us in which we operate as an essential social being in a wider public, a society, and a global community. Above that, on the mental plane, the mentive plane, there is the I other, where we see ourselves as a subject that is constantly defining outer objects. This is a tree, this is a person, this is a sidewalk, this is a cloud. We're always differentiating according to mentality in the same way that we're always bonding and relating when it comes to the astrality, the affectivity of our consciousness on that level of the emotive. And above that, on the purely ahamkaric plane, if you will, the egoic plane, we're dealing here with the egoic capacities of I and me. I am the subjective inner consciousness. Pardon me. You can clearly see that there is a kind of transcendency which takes place as we move up, because the next shift moves to the theosophical Buddhic plane, or what I've termed the intuitive, and that is I am transpersonal, unitive consciousness. If we were to look upon this axis in terms of transcendency, we would see that the more refined and subtle elements move upward. We move from I'm an inter-objective transactional consciousness that can interact with the world through interagency causation. I can have an effect on things, finite things. They can have an effect on me. I, it, physical. It becomes more subtle when we move into the plane of imagination, the emotive plane of our conscious being, where I'm an intersubjective shared consciousness. My consciousness, in terms of relationships and bonds with others, are largely a matter of the imagination and feeling. And that's reflected at that level, on the emotive plane. On the mental plane, I other, there's the discriminating consciousness, as we said, tends to objectify everything. And that's, of course, the plane of dogmas and credos and belief systems, which can divide us from one another as surely as an I-us compartmentalization where there is us and then them, because I see myself as part of us. So it's very natural then for us as a collectivity at that level of imagination to perceive all others as not us. And that becomes reinforced through the dogmas on the mental plane of the I other. Now, on the purely epistemic plane, if you will, where the epistemic relation of subject-object holds sway. There's always that correlation. You can't have an object without a subject. Well, in the inner world, it begins with the I, me. Everything that I generate, whether it's a thought or a feeling or a willing, is something that belongs to me. I'm at the center. I'm that identity. As we move along the axis of identity, To the next level, we see that the I, thou, is the transpersonal. It's the unitive consciousness. It's a consciousness that basically we understand in terms of the appreciation of the beautiful, where you're in wonder, where it is a certification of truth, a verification of truth. And you discover, you realize, you certify something as actual. It's the will to overcome all obstacles, build something new, and leave a lasting legacy. Not just materially, legacies are made as well on the higher planes. And that's what actually is occurring on that plane of I, thou. And in the same way that you have truth being appreciated by the elithic sense, and you have beauty that is being appreciated by the aesthetic sense, and you have will that is being unfolded and appreciated by the conscience, by what fundamentally is the archaic sense, the moral sense, the ethical sense. There's another sense, the auctorial. An auctorial sense is where you know that you are the author of whatever you are doing. You know they're the author of what you speak, the author when you write something down, when you make a signature, when you make a declaration. You know that you're the author of any thought that you have, any feeling that you're generating, and that you're owning at the time. And above that, of course, is the basic cogno level of I am. That is conscious being. I am universal, unlimited consciousness. At that level, what we consider our lower senses of identity vanish in a sense of universality. This is spoken of throughout the world by meditators who attain moving up and down this ladder of identity, this spine, if you will, of what identity is. Remember, this identity has nothing to do with what you are. You will identify with various aspects of ontos or of being in these appropriate fashions. When you're on the physical plane, there's an inter-objective. There are different objects. My body is part of it. That's the way that I have identification in this world. I have identification with a body, which is one of the its within that interdependent scheme of all this physical phenomena, of which my body is a part of. On the astral or the emotive level, where imagination holds sway and the I, us is there, you have the intersubjective shared consciousness. This is something which is just as real as the interobjective transactional consciousness that we all have on the physical world. Because something is invisible, whether it's gamma rays or whether it's higher forms of energy, doesn't mean that they don't have an influence or an effect or are not part of syncadena. That is the entire causal network in which we are all involved. And so it goes with the others. Whether we are dividing and just objectifying things, whether we are subjectifying it by defining and looking at our own self-generated images and ideas, or the higher forms, transpersonal, where we have a sense of unity, which is beginning to occur through wonder of beauty, through apprehension of truth, through the unfoldment of the ethical sense, and through the sheer power of livingness, of vivacience, of life, of this auctorial sense at this plane of transpersonality. And then above that, there's the realization that consciousness and being have a deep relationship, which we will go into in a future episode. What is important to understand is the identity is who you are. And that has to do with the 7 bases of consciousness that creates the axis or spine of your identity. All the other things are whats and whences, whens. They all congregate around and have being of what you are, of what you unfold, and what you're willing to identify with. Now, self-mastery is controlling what you identify with. When you selfologize, it helps to discover what it is that you are controlling in the mastery of your own conscious being. Now, just as self-mastery has to do with controlling what you identifying with, it's also the clear realization that when it comes to identity itself, there is no control over it. It's the only thing that is identical to itself. It is the only thing that knows itself. Instantly, immediately, completely, intuitively. St. Francis, you'll recall, said what we are looking for is what is looking. In terms of omni-philosophy, what we are looking for is who is looking. So, until our next session, behave when you must. Be good whenever you can. But above all else, be yourself.